Something came up. We'll celebrate another time. My family texted one by one on the morning of my anniversary dinner. I ate alone, paid the bill, and remained silent. An hour later, I saw their selfies at my aunt's cat's birthday. That night, I canceled the rent transfer, severed the utilities, and took the spare car key off the hook. I, 34M, stared at my phone that Tuesday morning, watching the messages roll in one by one. My wife texted first, saying something urgent had come up at work and she wouldn't make our anniversary dinner. Then my brother followed with his excuse about a client emergency. My sister chimed in next about her kids being sick. Finally, my parents sent their regrets about a last-minute doctor's appointment. Each message felt like a small betrayal, but I told myself these things happen. Life gets complicated. People have responsibilities. I'd been planning this dinner for weeks at Romano's, the same restaurant where my wife and I had our first date 7 years ago. The reservation was for 6 people at 7 p.m. sharp. By noon, I'd received apologies from everyone who mattered most to me. I sat in my home office, the same office I'd been working from for the past 3 years to help support not just my wife, but my younger brother who'd been staying in our guest room rent-free while he figured things out, and my sister who I'd been helping with her mortgage payments since her divorce. The weight of disappointment settled in my chest, but I decided to go anyway. Maybe it would be nice to have some quiet time to reflect on the past year. My wife and I had been through a rough patch lately, with her working late more often and me feeling increasingly isolated despite being surrounded by family who seemed to need me only when it was convenient for them. I arrived at Romano's exactly at 7, dressed in the new suit I'd bought specifically for this occasion. The hostess led me to our reserved table, set for 6 with fresh flowers and flickering candles. I told her the others had canceled, and she looked at me with that particular mixture of pity and embarrassment that people reserve for obviously stood-up dinner companions. I ordered the wine I'd been saving to share and tried to enjoy the solitude. The pasta was excellent, the atmosphere romantic despite my solo status, and I found myself oddly peaceful. Perhaps this was exactly what I needed, a moment to think without the constant demands and expectations that seemed to define my relationships with everyone I loved. Just as I was finishing my second glass of wine, my phone buzzed with a notification from Instagram. My sister had posted a new photo. My blood ran cold as I opened it. There they were, all of them. My wife, my brother, my sister, and my parents, gathered around a small table decorated with tiny party hats and balloons. The caption read, "Happy 3rd birthday to Princess Whiskers. Aunt Linda always throws the best pet parties." They were all smiling, holding champagne glasses, clearly having a wonderful time at my aunt's house celebrating her cat's birthday. The betrayal hit me like a physical blow. Not one emergency. Not a single legitimate excuse. They had simply chosen a cat's birthday party over my wedding anniversary. Over me. I sat there for several minutes, processing what I was seeing. My wife, who had supposedly been called into an urgent work meeting, was wearing the dress I'd complimented that morning. My brother, facing his alleged client emergency, had found time to put on a festive shirt. My parents, who couldn't make it due to a doctor's appointment, looked remarkably healthy as they posed with the birthday cat. I called for the check, paid the full bill including the wine that was meant to be shared, and walked to my car in a daze. The drive home gave me time to think, and by the time I pulled into my driveway, something fundamental had shifted inside me. They had made their choice. Now it was time for me to make mine. I walked into my house and went straight to my home office. I opened my laptop and began making some overdue changes. First, I logged into my banking app and found the automatic transfer I'd set up to help cover the mortgage on this house. A house that technically belonged to my wife and me, but where I'd been the sole financial contributor for the past 2 years while she invested in her career. I canceled the transfer scheduled for the next day. Next, I called the utility companies. Since all the accounts were in my name, a detail my wife had insisted upon for credit-building purposes, it was surprisingly easy to have the services disconnected. The electricity would be shut off Thursday, water on Friday, and internet immediately. Finally, I walked to the kitchen where my brother's spare car key hung on a small hook by the garage door. The car was technically mine. I'd bought it for him 6 months ago when his old one broke down, though the title remained in my name for insurance purposes. I took the key and slipped it into my pocket. That night, I slept better than I had in months. The next morning, my wife came home earlier than usual. She walked into the kitchen where I was making coffee and kissed my cheek. asking how my evening had been. I told her it was enlightening. She seemed confused by my response, but didn't press. She mentioned having grabbed dinner with some colleagues after her emergency meeting ran late, and I simply nodded. When she asked if we could reschedule our anniversary dinner for the weekend, I told her I'd think about it. My brother emerged from his room around noon, complaining about his difficult client from the night before. He was already dressed to go out, mentioning something about meeting friends for lunch. I watched him grab his car key from the hook, try to start the engine, and return inside looking perplexed. He asked if I knew why his car wouldn't start. I suggested maybe it was the battery and offered to take a look later. He called an Uber instead. Thursday evening, I was reading in my office when the lights went out. My wife called from the living room, asking what had happened. I told her I had no idea and suggested she call the power company. The confused conversation she had with the customer service representative was quite entertaining to overhear from my position in the hallway. They informed her that the account holder had requested disconnection. When she explained that couldn't be right, they asked her to verify the account information. Since her name wasn't on the account, they couldn't discuss it further. She returned to me, visibly frustrated, asking if I knew anything about this. I told her it was very strange and suggested she might want to call them back tomorrow to sort things out. Friday brought the water shutoff, and by evening, my wife was bordering on panic. My brother had finally given up trying to start his car and was pestering me about when I might have time to look at it. Neither of them seemed to connect these inconveniences to Tuesday night's festivities. My sister called Friday night, asking if I could help with her mortgage payment again this month. I told her I was having some cash flow issues and wouldn't be able to help anymore. The silence on her end was profound. Over the weekend, as my family dealt with their various crises, I received several calls asking for help. My wife needed money for a hotel since our house was without utilities. My brother needed a ride to work since his car was mysteriously dead. My parents called asking if I could pick them up for Sunday dinner since their usual transportation, my brother, was unavailable. I declined each request politely, citing my own busy schedule. Update 1. By Monday, exactly 1 week after my solitary anniversary dinner, the situation had reached a tipping point. My wife had spent the weekend at a hotel, calling me repeatedly to ask when I was going to fix our utility situation. Each time, I expressed my own confusion and suggested she handle it since she was equally responsible for our household. My brother had missed 3 days of work due to transportation issues. He'd finally broken down and asked me directly what was wrong with his car. I told him I'd been too busy to take a look, but suggested he call a mechanic. That evening, my entire family gathered at my parents' house for what they described as an intervention. I arrived to find them all seated in the living room wearing expressions of concern and frustration. My wife spoke first, explaining how she'd discovered that I had somehow caused all the utilities to be disconnected. She'd finally managed to get through to a supervisor who confirmed that the account holder, me, had requested the disconnections. My brother then detailed his car troubles and his growing suspicion that I was involved somehow. He'd had it towed to a mechanic who found nothing wrong with it except that it needed a new key to start. My sister mentioned my sudden refusal to help with her mortgage, wondering if I was having some kind of financial crisis they should know about. My parents asked if I was having some sort of breakdown and needed professional help. I let them all speak, watching their faces as they tried to piece together my recent behavior. Finally, when they were done, I pulled out my phone and showed them the Instagram post from Tuesday night. The room fell silent. My wife was the first to speak, trying to explain that my aunt had specifically requested that they keep the party small and not mention it to extended family. She said she hadn't wanted to hurt my feelings by telling me I wasn't invited. My brother added that he'd felt awkward about going, but didn't want to disappoint our elderly aunt. My parents explained that they'd only gone to be polite and hadn't realized it would conflict with our plans. My sister insisted that she tried to get out of it, but felt obligated since our aunt had helped her during her divorce. I listened to each excuse, noting how none of them included an apology for lying to me. None of them acknowledged that they'd chosen a cat's birthday party over my wedding anniversary. None of them seemed to understand that the problem wasn't the party itself. It was the deception and the casual dismissal of something important to me. I asked them a simple question. If they'd been honest about the conflict, would any of them have chosen to attend my anniversary dinner instead? The silence that followed was answer enough. Update 2. That night, I told my family exactly how I'd been feeling for the past year. I explained that I'd gradually become nothing more than a financial safety net and problem solver for people who couldn't be bothered to prioritize me when it actually mattered. I told my wife that our marriage had become a transaction where I provided stability and resources while she provided excuses and empty promises about someday reciprocating my efforts. I told my brother that his temporary stay had stretched into 8 months of rent-free living while I covered his car payments, insurance, and frequently his groceries, all while he maintained an active social life that apparently never included gratitude or consideration for my own needs. I told my sister that I'd been enabling her poor financial decisions for 2 years without ever seeing evidence that she was working toward actual independence. I told my parents that they'd raised children who felt entitled to my help, but had never taught them to value my time or feelings in return. The conversation was difficult, but it felt like finally exhaling after holding my breath for months. My wife cried and promised to change, insisting that she did value our marriage and had just gotten caught up in work stress. She begged me not to give up on us over one mistake. My brother became defensive, pointing out all the times he'd helped around the house and arguing that family should support each other without keeping score. My sister accused me of being cruel and manipulative, threatening to cut contact if I continued this emotional blackmail. My parents tried to mediate, suggesting we all needed to communicate better and work through this like adults. But I was done communicating. Actions had spoken louder than any words ever could. Update 3. 3 months have passed since that night. I filed for divorce 2 weeks after our conversation, citing irreconcilable differences. My wife fought it initially, promising therapy and major changes, but eventually accepted that I was serious. My brother moved in with a friend after I gave him 30 days' notice to find alternative housing. The car situation resolved itself when I sold it and used the money to cover some of the utilities bills I'd incurred during my week of disconnections. My sister and I haven't spoken since that night at my parents' house, though I heard through other relatives that she managed to keep her house through a combination of budgeting and finding a second job. My parents have tried to maintain relationships with everyone, occasionally asking if I've reconsidered my positions. I haven't. The divorce was finalized last month. I kept the house after buying out my wife's half with money I'd apparently been saving without realizing it. Turns out supporting an entire extended family had been quite expensive. I've started dating someone new, a woman I met through a hiking group. She's financially independent, emotionally available, and most importantly, she shows up when she says she will. Our third date was supposed to be dinner and a movie, but she had to cancel due to a genuine family emergency involving her father's hospitalization. She called me from the hospital waiting room to explain, apologized repeatedly, and rescheduled for the following week. The difference in treatment was striking. Last Tuesday marked exactly 1 year since my solitary anniversary dinner. I went back to Romano's, this time with my new girlfriend. We toasted to new beginnings and honest relationships. As I sat there, I reflected on how much my life had changed. I was no longer anyone's safety net, backup plan, or financial solution. I was no longer surrounded by people who took my presence for granted while prioritizing everything else. Some might say my response was extreme, that I should have had a conversation before taking action. That family is supposed to forgive and work through problems together. But I'd spent years having conversations that led nowhere. I'd spent years being understanding while my understanding was never reciprocated. I'd spent years being the reliable one while everyone else got to be spontaneous and irresponsible. The truth is, they didn't miss me until they missed what I provided for them. And that told me everything I needed to know about the relationships I'd been trying so hard to preserve. My new girlfriend asked me once why I seemed so surprised when she followed through on her commitments. I told her about my family's tendency to prioritize everything except me, and she looked genuinely confused. She said it seemed like basic respect to honor commitments to people you care about. She said she couldn't imagine choosing a pet's birthday party over her partner's anniversary, no matter who was hosting it. Her perspective reminded me that what I'd been accepting as normal family dynamics was actually just poor treatment that I'd tolerated for far too long. I don't regret the actions I took that night. I don't regret the boundaries I set or the relationships I ended. I don't regret choosing myself for once instead of being the perpetual giver in relationships where my needs came last. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for yourself is to stop accepting love that feels like leftovers. Sometimes the healthiest choice is to walk away from people who treat your kindness like weakness and your reliability like entitlement. My family taught me an important lesson that night. When people show you where you rank in their priorities, believe them. And when they consistently choose everything else over you, choose yourself. I'm happier now than I've been in years. My house is quieter, my bank account is healthier, and my relationships are built on mutual respect rather than one-sided obligation. That Tuesday night changed everything, and I'm grateful it did. Sometimes it takes a cat's birthday party to show you who really matters in your life, and more importantly, who you really matter to in return.